So we're gonna jump into the wiring of the Transit Extended Van. So you're gonna have this pre-packaged in your kit. It's gonna be labeled Transit Cab Wire Kit, and this is gonna have everything you need for your electrical. So I'm gonna go ahead and open this up and we'll go through. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of go in order of what's in the box here. So the first is this ELTC DTCH. These are going to be connections for your light panels and your ceiling. And then we have these little splitters. These are going to be for all of your 12 volt and USB outlets. So we're going to add these on once we've run our wiring harness through like the cavities of the van. And then we have our actual 12 volt outlets here. And then this EFBT should be your fuse block. You're going to have your fuse block in here, some jewel lock to attach it. And then these are going to be the ground extenders. So in the very beginning when we kind of disconnected the factory forward grounds and relocated that wiring harness, we're going to attach these so we can lengthen those and reattach them to the factory grounds. We have some zip ties to kind of hold everything in place. That'll make more sense when we're actually getting into it. We have our actual battery connection. So this has your breaker and then the 4-gauge wire we're going to use to connect into the battery of the van. We have a little box here. So this is going to be your USB outlets. So we have the little box of the 12 volts and then the USBs here. And then here we have our actual wiring loom. So this is going to be our main wiring loom. We're going to do this part first. We're going to run it along the driver's side of the van as well as the passenger side. And then this is what we'll connect all those smaller connectors into. So let's get into it. Okay, to start the wiring, we're going to start on the driver's side of the van. And we're also going to start with the driver's side wiring loom here. It's labeled driver. And you want to start with the end that has all of the like smaller leads coming out. This is what's going to connect into our fuse block down the line. So basically we can just tuck where this piece of heat shrink is. You can tuck it up on this little metal shelf here for now, just to kind of keep it in place. Your fuse block's going to mount in this general area. We'll do that a little bit later. But I'm just going to take a zip tie. There's a little factory hole right here, and I'm just going to zip tie this in place to keep it from shifting at all. Next you have your main part of your wiring loom here, and then you have your first drop. This first one is going to have a label on the end that should say B-pillar plugs or something similar. Yeah, B-pillar plugs 15 amp. So that's going to go into this cavity here. Before I do that, I'm going to take that chunkier main part of the harness and tuck it up into the wire chase. It's going to be a little bit of a tight fit up here because we have our factory wiring harness up there as well. But it should still fit, so we can kind of just tuck it in there. For now. There's like a second heat shrink section here that has a little bit of grip to it, so you can tuck it just underneath this corner here, and it'll hold on to it. Okay, so before I feed this wire down into that B-pillar, I'm actually just going to take a little piece of electrical tape. You could use like painter's tape, whatever you got, just to tape the ends together. This is going to keep them from like one catching on something and keeping the harness from going down into that cavity. Because there's a few different holes back there. So again, this is going to be kind of like a by feel thing. It's kind of hard to show, but it's going to be your first main opening if you can fit your arm back there. And you can kind of feel like this curve start. So I'm just going to bend this a little bit and then just feel my way back there and try and get it down that cavity. It might take a couple tries. Okay, so you can see it pop out down at the bottom. So you can just grab that, just pull it the rest of the way here. Perfect. And now that that's down there, we're just going to leave that there and we'll come back to it later to add our pigtails. We'll also kind of mess with this a little later. But I just want to mention while we're here, this harness, you want to keep it pretty tight up to the roof. The trim piece that's going to sit here is pretty tight to the van body, so we're going to have to kind of move these out of the way so you don't want to have any like bulky wiring sticking out. So as close as you can keep it all to your roof. Again, zip ties if you need them. And then we'll kind of come back to adding our wiring or our fuse block later down the line. Okay, so our next drop after the B pillar is going to be this front lights drop. So we're actually going to tuck this right underneath our speed strut. And then we're just going to leave it kind of hanging here until we're ready to hook into it with our light panel later on. And then the next drop after that, so after this next heat shrink, this long wire here is going to be our C pillar plugs. So this we're going to like run down similar to what we did with the B pillar, except we want to feed it through one of these factory holes above the wire chase here. You don't want any wiring laying on top of these wire chases. It'll interfere with the track and the panels later on. So there's a few holes in here. I'm going to use kind of the middle one and just feed it down, and it's going to pop out in this cavity under here. Perfect. Kind of tuck this in here. Okay, so now that I have this through here, I'm going to feed it actually back into this hole, and we're going to run it down this C pillar. The hole you're going to feed this through inside is going to be a lot smaller than the one on the B pillar. So just kind of feel around, and you can actually, if you can fit your hand in this little hole here, you can feel like the connection on either side. So that's kind of helpful to pull it through and kind of guide it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So you can see it kind of popped out here. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue feeding it down, and it'll pop out in our lower bay down there. Awesome. So you can see it's down here, and then we'll just leave it hanging just like we did with the P pillar and come back to it later on. Okay, so moving down the line here, I'm going to continue to tuck my main harness up into the wire chase. It's going to be a little tight again here, so just do the best you can. Use zip ties if you need to. There we go. And our next drop is actually going to be an auxiliary drop. So this is optional. It doesn't hook into anything that comes in the kit, but you can use, like, if you want to add extra lights, a plug, something like that. It's here if you need it. So I'm just going to feed it through one of these factory holes and just tuck it behind here. We can secure it later on if we don't want to use it with some hush mat or tape, something like that to keep it from rattling. We're going to keep feeding here. The loom will get a little thinner as we go along, so it'll be easier to tuck behind there. The next one here is going to be our aft lights. So my lead is a little bit short to run on the aft side of this ceiling rib, so I'm just going to run it right to beside the fan here so we can hook into our light panel when it comes. So I'm going to let that hang there and then continue to run my harness here. So since the factory harness is getting pretty thick, I'm having trouble getting our smaller harness to stay. So you can actually at this point, since it's a lot thinner, run it behind the actual ceiling rib. There's a little bit of a gap where the rib meets the ceiling of the van. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If your clearance here is smaller, you can always use zip ties to hold it in place instead of passing it behind. That's no problem. Just make sure again to be on top of this wire chase, not in front of it. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing behind this rib here, and then we're going to drop this last plug drop through our D pillar. Okay, so I'm just going to pass this last one under this rib. Okay, so this last one, it's going to be your last one left, but it says rear plugs, 15 amp. And we're just going to follow this factory harness. We're going to go on top of our wire chase and then through this plastic lined hole, and that's going to drop us through the D pillar and then out near the bottom where we need to be. So I saw mine pop out down there. There's quite a few wires that run through this same kind of channel, so it might get caught up on some things. You should be able to kind of reach your hand up in there and feel around and get a hand on it to just pull it the rest of the way through. I'm going to hook that there. And you can see down here it popped out, and this is what we're going to connect to our plugs later on. So now we're finished running our physical loom through our driver's side, so we're going to move on to the passenger side and do the same thing. Okay, so we're going to move on to our passenger side wiring harness. Before we actually get the wiring harness, we're just going to pop this factory headliner down. Basically, we're going to run our harness right underneath the lip of this headliner to meet up with the other side where our fuse block is going to be. So there's 3 factory clips. You can kind of see the indents here in the headliner itself. So you just need to pop those out. You just need a removal tool. They're the same kind of clips that like the door panel were attached with, things like that. So you just need to get under the lip and pop them out. So now that that's free, we'll be able to tuck our wiring harness underneath and run it, and then we'll run it through these cavities here and then into the main part of the kit. Okay, so I've got my passenger side harness, and we're going to use the same end that we started with on the other side, so the one that's going to plug into the fuse block. And then there's 2 pieces of heat shrink. So there's one here that leads into all those separate leads, and then there's another one down the line a little bit where the leads like to go to all the different drops start. So this one here, I'm going to tuck under the same kind of ledge we used with the other side. And then there's a factory hole here that I've threaded a zip tie through. So I'm just going to loosely set this zip tie. You want it to have a little bit of play still, just in case we need to move it back and forth, but you want it to stay in place too. So let's... Okay. So I'm giving it a little bit of slack there, just enough to let the harness move back and forth if we need it. So I'm just going to follow the curve here. There's a little bit of an indent for this top rib. And then I'm just gonna lay the harness in front of those clips we popped out for now. We can manipulate it later on if we need to. But okay. And that's just to allow these to pop out and meet up with our driver's side harness, and then we'll be able to plug that all into the fuse block when we're ready for it. Okay, so now that we've got the front end of our wiring harness tucked under the headliner, we're gonna run it along above the slider here. So we're not, on this side we don't have a wiring chase to tuck it under, so we're just gonna zip tie it to this rib here to keep it from falling down. You wanna keep it as high as you can. Again, similar with the other side, we're gonna have a trim piece here that sits pretty flush with the metal of the van, so you don't want your bulky wiring kind of getting in the way of that. So, before we do that, actually, you're gonna have your first drop here, which is actually just an auxiliary drop. It's typically used for a heater or something like that. The label on there is going to be aux2, so it has a little bit of heat shrink on the end in case you're not using it, and we can just tuck that out of the way for now. So I'm just going to loom it up and just tuck it back here, and we'll secure it a little later on down the line to keep it from rattling or anything like that, because we're not going to use it in this specific build, but you can use it for anything you'd like in yours. So we have a second drop right at the front here as well, which is going to be our front fan. So that's that front fan in this kind of first main bay. It's the second bay technically, but the first one's curved up here. So it's going to be in this bay here, so we're going to just pass it. I'm going to pass it underneath this ceiling rib and then underneath this speed strut and just leave it hanging for later on. We don't have a fan in this specific build, so we'll end up capping it, but just to get a visual. So this is how you would want to run it if you had a fan here. Then you connect it right into your fan. This has a little bit of heat shrink on the end as well, just in case you're not using it. It keeps those ends nice and capped off and safe. So I'm going to leave that there for now. And if you're not using it, you can just loom it up with that aux drop from before. So I'll do that now, actually. So now, with the main part of our loom, I'm going to zip tie it up to this rib. Okay, so I've placed a little zip tie next to this ceiling rib here, and the passenger side harness, it's a little different than the driver's side because at this last heat shrink, all of the leads kind of split off from one another. So you're going to have to kind of sort through and figure out what your next one is. So the next one we're going to want is our C-pillar. So it's going to be a pretty decently long lead. Yes, it's going to be C-pillar plugs. So I'm going to go ahead and feed the harness up into our wire chase. And then similar to the other side, I'm just going to feed this through one of the factory holes. And then just kind of angle it back. So we're going to want to go back to that C-pillar. So, similar to the other side, just kind of want to feel for it, and you're not going to be able to reach your hand in on this side, but you should be able to see it kind of pass through and down that C-pillar and then pop out the bottom. So the passenger side C-pillar was a little trickier than the driver's side. The opening's a little smaller, and once you have the wire harness in the hole, there's a few like split offs, but like after where you can feel, if that makes sense. So you can get caught in this side of the 0 line, or you can come down like this way instead of out this way. So what we ended up doing is one person kind of stood at the top and moved the harness until you could just get your fingers on it and pull it through. But you want it to be coming out this cavity so that it connects in with the plugs on the panel. So you definitely don't want it on this side or this side of this L track. And this lead's not really long enough to come out that side anyway. So this one might take you a few tries. I found putting some electrical tape on the end of this one, just like we did with the B pillar, was really helpful. Okay, so after our C pillar plugs, we're gonna have another aux drop. I'm just gonna wind this up and store it away like we've done with others. So our next drop after this is going to be our fan. So our fan's here, so I'm going to pass this one right under this ceiling rib. And then we'll add our connectors a little later. And then the last lead we're going to have is for our D pillar plugs. So this is going to be your longest lead here. So we're just going to keep running along this wiring chase like we did on the other side. And then we're going to feed it same way into this factory plastic lined hole, and then it'll pop out down on the like forward edge of this piece of A-frame. So now we're all finished running our main harness. We're going to move into connecting our ground connections and then as well as all of our plug extenders.